Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast, Our New Narrative, and today is July the 2nd, 2020. We're on the back half of 2020, and it has been a hell of a ride so far. So thinking about that, we're going to be out there celebrating the 4th of July, and I want to remind everyone to celebrate diversity safely, okay? Today's episode is going to be in part one in a series of 4. And I want to thank a subscriber, Default Gateway, for bringing to my attention a very insightful video that I thought I would bring to the channel and give my 2 thoughts and interject about the conversation that's going on in this video that's presented by Anthony O'Neill, Mr. Anthony O'Neill's channel. But before we get to the content of this video, I want to do 2 things. 1, ask you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It's really helpful. I want to get up to the 1,000 subscribers needed in order for me to do live chat so I can do some questions and answers in real time. And 2, I want to read an episode, a portion. I want to read a couple of paragraphs out of my book so that you guys can understand my point of view and where I'm coming from and why I feel it's necessary we need a new narrative. We meaning specifically African Americans and in general America. So I'm gonna start it off with just a couple of sentences, just to give you guys a little bit of what I'm concerned with and where I'm coming from when I'm doing my talking. Okay, so here we go. The class was called The Philosophy of Jurisprudence, and the topic that day was the pros and cons of affirmative action policies. The professor was a middle-aged white man known for his liberal politics, and it was clear that he was sincerely in favor of affirmative action policies. He explained that affirmative action is a great idea because it gives African Americans an opportunity to better themselves, become successful, leave the ghetto, and live in his neighborhood, which he explained was predominantly white and affluent. It was basically like the neighborhood where I lived and was accosted by the cops for the infraction of walking while black. What my professor said sounded right at face value, but it just didn't feel right to me. My professor was a great guy. He meant no harm and believed in what he was saying. In fact, I could have been considered a textbook example of a black guy that was accomplishing what affirmative action policies had intended. I was successful in the sense that I had escaped the ghetto and was living in an affluent white neighborhood. However, I couldn't consider residing in an affluent neighborhood to be a real prize if the vast majority of my neighbors were white and I was always a suspect. As I sat there listening to my professor go on about this, I just couldn't help myself. I spoke up with, "Why should I have to strive to live in your neighborhood?" I challenged. Why do I have to separate myself from black people to be considered successful? So that has been the question that's been eating at me for decades now, and it's taken me on a long journey down this rabbit hole to figure out why, after being in this country for 400 years, and all that African Americans have overcome and achieved, which a lot of historians say has been one of the greatest feats in mankind history, to achieve so much in so little time. Why don't we attract other people to our communities, and why is there such a brain drain? Meaning, like, most affluent African Americans tend to leave the African American community for different communities. So the answer I always got was, is racism stupid? But it's definitely more complex and nuanced than that, and I wanted to find an answer, and I believe that I can point out how complex and nuanced that reasoning is via this conversation that I'm about to share with you guys. So I'm about to share my screen here. That worked. And here we go.
like so serious right now. Yo, thank you all for coming out. I say about a month ago, God put in my spirit for Black History Month to celebrate our African-American males and females from the past, but then also celebrate the ones who are currently living. And I just want to have a conversation. So tonight, if you can just say your name and what you do, and we'll just go down that way and come down this way.
Cool. My name is Joel. I am 28 years old. I work for a fitness company called D1. Work strictly on the franchising side and helping support business owners in our system.
My name is Mignon Francois, and I'm old enough to be Joel's mother. I am the founder and CEO of a cupcake brand here in the United States of America. I'm very proud to run the Cupcake Collection.
And I'm Ricky Fletcher. I'm 29, and I do business development for a healthcare IT company here in Nashville.
I am Tasha Andrews. I'm 34 years old, and I am an HBCU administrator.
My name is Sean Davis. I'm a man of a certain age. I'm a restaurateur and owner of the brand Big Shake's Hot Chicken.
My name is Simone Park, and I'm the owner of Heart for Hair Salon.
My name is Christian. I'm 30 years old. I'm full-time in ministry as a youth leader and a creative director and kingdom builder.
I love it. I love it. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to say one word, and you can only give me a response in 4 words. What does wealth mean to you?
Family, health, spirituality, and money.
Stability.
I could put it in these words: family, paying your bills on time, generational pass-throughs to your kids, right? Wealth means just freedom.
That's it. Lender, not the borrower.
That's a good one. That was really good. For me, it's the ability to decide.
Ooh. Yeah. I think independence, the ability to decide, to do what you want to do, create what you want to do, really live out your own ideas.
Love it.
When I hear the word wealth, I think about wisdom, success, family, and education.
I love it. I love it. One more.
Now, just that word wisdom, I think across the board, I would be shocked to hear someone object to anything they actually said inside the Black community, outside the Black community. So there's a, agreement on the term, what wealth means to them. And I think most people would agree with what they said.
Let's go deep.
Them was a deep.
Now we're going deep.
Let's go deeper, dog.
I
And anyone can take this. Anyone can take this. When you think of this word in 4 words or less, what does it mean to you? Privilege.
I think white. I think American. I think rich and entitled.
Definitely a feeling of empowerment was not deserved. Definitely a feeling of being in control of the unknown and just knowing that you are, cannot be touched in a way. White is another word that comes to mind. Supremacy, a whole lot of words, but just that feeling of being powerful.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would say white America, silver spoon would be the 4 words that I would choose to describe privilege.
Why you look like that?
Me?
Yeah.
Because I just didn't see it in that way. The first thing I thought when you said privilege was, it's one of 2 things. It's either, for me, that's who I am. I am privileged. Sometimes I think we want to take on a sort of secular view of what it means to be privileged. And we're so concerned with what has happened to us instead of what has happened for us.
Now, love the answers that everyone gave. I'm not here to ridicule anyone or talk down about anyone, but there's a dividing line in the answers that were given that I want to point out. So 3 of the answers had white as, when they thought of privilege, they thought of white. And the lady who just finished speaking thought of herself. And I want to point out that this is an example of collectivist thinking and individualist thinking, right? And for those who don't know, I'm not going to go on what collectivism is versus individualism. You can just take the words as they are and kind of figure it out. But there's a danger in collectivist thinking. And the main danger when it comes to the African-American community is it tends to lead toward socialism. And under the collectivist umbrella, you have socialism and racism. So you don't have capitalism, individual liberties and responsibilities, right? That's outside of that umbrella. So although these people are all African-American and they have a similar experience in America and similar history, there's 2 separate ways of viewing the world. And at this point in the video, you have an entrepreneur who thinks as an individualist, as a capitalist, right? And then you have another entrepreneur who thinks, Deshaun Davis down in the front row, he has a more collectivist view of the world, like white people when it comes to privilege. And this is very significant because I believe that is one of the major hurdles when it comes to the problem I pointed out in what I read from you from my book, is why people who become successful in America tend to leave the Black community is because of the way of viewing the world. Some approach the world from an individualist responsibility, individualist liberty point of view, and others view it as a more collectivist group mentality, which leads towards socialism. And definitely, that's where you will find racism. And I have to, at this point, read one of the best definitions of racism I've ever read. And so just bear with me here and then we'll get back to the video. But racism is the lowest, most crudely primitive form of collectivism. It is the notion of ascribing moral, social, and political significance to a man's genetic lineage. The notion that a man's intellectual and characterological traits are produced and transmitted by his internal body chemistry, which means in practice that a man is to be judged not by his own character and actions, but by the character and actions of a collective of ancestors. So under collectivism is where you will find racism. And you will also find socialism and communism, Marxism, and all that. So with that, let's keep going.
I think that for me, there's nothing that I can't do. There's nothing that's impossible for me. So for me, when I stand and look at myself in the mirror, I say, I am privileged.
Expanding on that a little bit. You said white, you said white, you said white. What's your thoughts with what she said? Does that change the context? Do you see, or what's your response to?
It doesn't change the context, it doesn't change what I said, because that's the first thing that came to my mind.
Right.
So I've been through a lot in my life, whether it be negative, positive. So I've seen a lot of different things. So I totally get and I truly believe that and understand that that's the way she believes. But you asked the first thing that came to my mind.
Right.
That's what I said.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, I would piggyback on that. I don't think the two things, I agree with her. I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. Like you said, it's the first thing that came to my mind. So I was just speaking honestly. And also, while I do feel that all things are possible for me and that I can achieve anything I put my mind to, that doesn't mean that there doesn't exist a privilege outside of that. Like, you know what I mean? Just because I am capable of achieving anything that I want to achieve doesn't mean that it's not easier for another race. You know what I mean? I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
I guess when I said I am privileged, I wasn't taking it from the standpoint of what it means to be a Black woman. I understand privilege as a fair-skinned Black woman.
For sure.
You know, I'm a privileged, light-skinned, green-eyed Black woman. You know what I mean? I
Double deuce.
That, yeah.
That's it.
You know, so it's from the perspective, you know, that you look. And so when I hear the word, the first thing for me doesn't come to that, you know, and that's what I was trying.
And I agree with you, because I even understand privilege as a man versus you as a woman. And that's why my first two words were white and then American, because I think it's layers to it. I think as Americans, we're privileged. I don't think it just stops at, I think it's layers to it as you go throughout socioeconomic constructs. I think it's deeper than race, but
Absolutely.
So again, maybe you can see his examples were white and then American. It's still a group. I mean, the way you see the world is through a collectivist lens. Now, again, I'm not saying he's a horrible person, he's wrong. No, I just want to point out a point of view that a lot of African Americans have. And I believe that point of view is not fixed. It's not a permanent condition. Obviously, it's not obvious, but I had that same point of view, and not saying I'm, I've been delivered or I'm saved. I'm just saying one point of view will lead to more success and happiness in a free market society than the other view. And so when they go on and say it's deeper than race, it just shows you how, if you think in a collective, if you have a collectivist mindset, or if that's how you view the world, it's very easy to fall into a world full of racism where, you're not where you want to be because of others and not necessarily because of what you've done. That other group has done something that has handicapped me, instead of I haven't done enough to get me where I want to go. And I'm not saying he's playing the victim or anything like that. I'm just saying how you approach life. Although these are all Black people on here, you see that we as Black people don't approach life the same way or view life the same way.
I agree with what you're saying. There's different levels to it, so I agree with that for sure.
And I think your life experiences create the paradigm by which you see that through. It really depends on, some of the things that you've experienced personally. We all have our life experiences that have shaped who we are and how we think and how we see things. And I think that will be different for every person, every American, every woman, because, bringing up those differences, we have so many differences within our culture that help us see things a certain way.
And the biggest reason I didn't attach color or race to privilege is because I feel like the biggest advantage I have and the biggest privilege I have is my dad. And he's not like he was rich, he was a blue collar man, but he gave me all the support and guidance and love that I needed. And I look at some of my peers and some of my family members that didn't turn out the way they wanted to. And the biggest difference is my dad stuck around. And I didn't earn that, Dad. I was born into it. Not everyone has that. Like you said, culturally, it's different. And
Now that is one of the most significant things you'll probably ever hear. This country has a lot of resources, and one thing that is irreplaceable is human resources. And within the home, human capital, so to speak, the lack of fathers in the home is by far the biggest hurdle to African American success as a community. And that is a recent phenomenon, post 1960s era, right? So I know a lot of perceived problems in the African American community, such as racist cops or systematic racism and things like that. Well, I think I think, and a lot of people will agree, that the lack of fathers, specifically in African American home, has become a big problem for the African American community, and the lack of fathers in home in general has become a big problem in the American community. And those families with, you know, a father, a mother, they tend to produce better citizens, or whatever it is, but that's what it is, right? So when you take this guy who feels privileged to have had a father in the home to lead him, guide him, to show him what it is, what his father thought it meant to be a man, and for how to interact with other men, other women, how to approach the workforce, how to approach the world outside of the four walls you grew up in. That is lacking, not just in African American homes, but in American homes in general, right? And so if this Black young man had a father at home, why would I think that some random white person who grew up with a single mother, poor and destitute, is privileged? The only reason I would think that is because someone's trying to tell me that. And who's trying to tell me that? People who are perpetuating this old narrative of Black victimization. All right, so I don't want you to leave any video I put up with the notion or the thought that Andre doesn't believe that Black people were ever victimized or there's no such thing as racism. It's out there, and my book alludes to that. But this narrative of Black victimization has done more harm to the Black community than any Klansman could have ever dreamed of. All right, so let's keep it going.
No, I wouldn't be where I was today without him. So I feel like I was privileged in that way.
When we think about African Americans today, do you think as a culture, we are in a healthy place? Are we in a healthy place when it comes to finances, when it comes to relationship, when it comes to parenting, when it comes to careers, when it comes to freedom, when it comes to racism? Are we in a healthy place?
I think we're going in the right direction.
Need to stop here just to talk about something no one ever talks about, and that is the origin of African American culture. And by the way, I'm drinking water here. I know I'm telling you to celebrate diversity, but drinking water. So the origins of African American history, and most of us, just simply because the way we look, the term African is in front of American to identify us. People claim we're from Africa, and when racists want to be assholes, they say, go back to Africa, whatever. Well, what's the origins of our culture is actually European. And I'm going, before you throw up or start breaking out in hives, let me expound on that. So I'm gonna start with one of my heroes, Mr. Frederick Douglass, and just read a little. First part, author's birth. It's about a couple of sentences to give you the idea where I'm coming from here. So it was in this dull, flat, and unthrifty district or neighborhood bordered by the Choptank River, along the laziest and muddiest of streams, surrounded by a white population of the lowest order, indulgent and drunken to a proverb, and among slaves who, in point of ignorance and indulgence, were fully in accord with their surroundings, that I, without any fault of my own, was born and spent the first years of my childhood. So Frederick Douglass is telling you, hey, as a slave, I grew up around some crazy, indulgent, ignorant white folks. And that is basic. This was written in 1881, Frederick Douglass' book. And in, I think, 1995, this book called Albion Seed came out, The Four British Folkways in America by David Hatchett Fisher. And it's a big research book on the four major cultures that migrated from England to America. And of the four were Puritans, Quakers, Cavaliers, and rednecks. Now, not rednecks as an insulting term, but as an identifier. The rednecks tend to come from northern Britain, Cavaliers tended to come from the south of England near London, and the Quakers and the Puritans kind of throughout. I'm being very general here for the sake of time. But when David, Mr. Fisker did this research, he came up with basically, I guess, attributes of culture. And I'm just going to run through them so I don't take up too much time here. So a certain culture has these attributes: speech ways, building ways, family ways, marriage ways, gender ways, sex ways, child rearing ways, naming ways, age ways, death ways, religious ways, magic ways, learning ways, food ways, dress ways, sports ways, work ways, time ways, wealth ways, rank ways, social ways, order ways, power ways, freedom ways. And after I read this book, I read the Puritan, and how he lines up their culture with those ways. And I didn't recognize a lot there from my own background and family and history. And with the Quakers, it was the same thing. It seemed kind of a foreign culture to me. But when I read the Cavalier ways, which, if you know, the Cavaliers were basically the rich folks who migrated from England to America, mainly in the South. They owned all the plantations, right? A lot of that stuff looked very familiar. I can see, like, the speech ways, we still speak like that. And some of the stuff we say, this and that, and you can still find that over in England today. And in the redneck ways, it was like, oh my God, this is me. This is us. The speech ways, marriage ways, the way we view education, sports, all that stuff. This stuff didn't originate in the American South. It originated in England. I mean, even chitlins and jumping a broom, which is a European pagan ritual, all that stuff originated hundreds, if not thousands of years before any European stepped foot on American soil. Now, why is this important? Because a lot of the things that we hold dear and true about African American culture isn't even African in origin. And a lot of those attributes do not lead to success in a modern free market industrial society. So we as African Americans can feel free to disassociate ourselves with some of those attributes that cause failure in a modern culture, the same way a lot of white people did. Now, I'll do another video on that later, but I just wanted to put that out there, and let's keep going.
I think there's a lot of positive things that are being seen, right? I also think that there's a lot of work that could be done.
Yep.
I'll say that for now. But
yeah. So, and I'm with you. I think it's progressing. I think we're better than we were yesterday, and not yesterday, literally yesterday, but a generation ago. I think as far as education, I don't have stats, but I'm sure education level, graduation rates, and even income level has raised in these last 20 years from the regression we've made as a Black community.
Personally, I still think we have a while to go, a long way to go. And I say that based on my personal experiences growing up, being, one of few Black kids in my neighborhood, in my school, even at my job now, what I do now, I'm the only Black guy on my team.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I would assume it's the same for you too.
It should be the same for most African Americans, unless you're surrounded by a bunch of African Americans. Like if you live in Detroit and you go to the local barbershop in Detroit, you're probably gonna be surrounded by African Americans. Atlanta, wherever, like most African Americans live in urban areas surrounded by each other. Once you leave that urban area, guess what? We only make up 12 to 15% of the American population. So there's an 85% chance that you will not find another African American in your surroundings, your immediate surroundings, just simple because of the math, right? It's not necessarily that, there's some nefarious thing going on or we're not trying hard enough. Now, that could be the case in some situations, but in general, the facts are this. We only make up at the most 15% of the country. So therefore, there's an 85% chance you're not going to run into an African American. Like somebody asked me, why weren't there more African Americans on the show Friends? And my answer is, why would there be? There's an 85% chance that those guys won't have an African American friend. Okay.
So you are seeing more Black executives and CEOs and people in positions of power, but it's, I mean, even just today, I'm watching ESPN. There's 4 NFL head coaches that are Black. I'm still not seeing us rise to the potential that I think we as a people should be able to rise to.
Correct.
I'll agree with you, bro. Like I'll jump out there and agree with you. I think to a great degree, our culture has been trained to just maintain and live in a post-traumatic state. I think
Yes.
instead of a lot of our issues being solved, we're being trained and distracted to just be desensitized by them and focus on other minuscule things. So it may seem like progress when really it's just an increased level of ignorance to a degree, because there's an illusion of equality, but when you really look at the constructs of and the statistics of how things level out, I think we're just trained to remain in a post-traumatic state and kind of just deal with it.
As far as that, like trained or conditioning, it's funny because my mom used to hate the show Good Times, so she wouldn't let me watch it. I was like, watch, because I hate the fact that they say keeping our head above water. We're not thriving. She's like, you need to watch the Cosbys or something like that, where it shows a Black family thriving as opposed to keeping your head above water. So that's part of hey, that was made for Black people just to show our conditions, and they didn't get better. I don't think they moved on
It's
up.
like being intellectually disabled, right?
Yeah.
You know, and stagnant. First off, I think education, right? You know, you have situations in, Black communities, white communities, whatever. The fact of the problem is not enough tax-paying individuals in those underprivileged areas. So that's why the education is not there, the teachers are not there, the books are not there. So it's definitely still a huge disadvantage for individuals coming up and trying to be that success, right? That success story.
And that's, a concern for anyone. I think, when you get a community full of people and you get the bright stars, and let's say someone runs off to the NBA and they leave the hood, right? Because one, they like things, they like their stuff. They don't want to be surrounded by people who they fear may take some of their stuff. Not saying that because it's the hood that equates to just or synonymous with danger. It's just, hey man, I made it. I can, buy a $4 million house. It'll look really weird putting a $4 million house in between two, 1,000 square foot homes. So I'm gonna move out to the suburbs, right? Or you get a doctor or a lawyer or a business owner that does the same thing. So you have these Black people that just leaves the rest of the Black population instead of being able to stay amongst Black people or even bring others into that Black community that are not African American to make that community even more vibrant and prosperous and things like that. Well, you're not going to be able to do that if a vast majority of the people in that community are looking for other people to help them instead of a vast majority of those people looking to help themselves first, right? And demand that hurdles that may be put in front of them be taken down. And if they're not taken down by someone else, you take them down as an individual.
So we got to work harder.
When we look at the African American culture and the African American communities, do y'all feel as if the education is the same compared to white communities? And do you feel as if financial education is being taught in our communities? Not just in the high schools, but in the community in general as a culture?
Wow. Personally, myself, I grew up with 2 loving parents, right? They were entrepreneurs, right? And I watched them. I watched them hustle. So I learned from them, right? My peers didn't have that. My peers didn't have a dad. My peers were out the street hustling. They were doing whatever they were doing, but they didn't have that. Just really having that support and understanding of what it meant to be fiscal educated, you know, how to get a bank account, how to write a check. Nah, that wasn't there. So it's kind of hard to succeed when you don't know the basics about financial literacy.
Yeah, and as far as financial literacy, the fact of the matter is Black people haven't had that much experience with finance in general to educate the past generation. You think about it, a lot of our parents came up, my dad was a working class guy, so we were never just having to manage wealth because there wasn't wealth there. So I think as we progress as a race and a society, hopefully we can catch up and there will be those chances to educate our kids about financial literacy. But a lot of us just didn't have the finances to educate people on.
It's so interesting because that question, I don't think that's a race question. I really don't.
I'm gonna stop there right quick. No, running a little long here, but he's absolutely right. I mean, if you ask any American, I don't even want to say the average American, 9 times out of 10, they couldn't tell you where money comes from, how money gets into the system, what the Federal Reserve Bank is. Most people think it's a government institution. But they're responsible for printing our money and interest rates, but they are not a government organization. They are a private corporation with shareholders that you don't know who they are, and they are beholden to no one. And if you don't know anything about this, you're not alone. Look it up, do your own research, because no matter who you are, Black, white, gay, straight, atheist, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, homophobic, or homosexual, we all spend that same dollar, and we all being affected negatively by the dwindling purchasing power of the dollar. So they're right. In the African American community specifically, no one's teaching you how to balance a checkbook, right? But who's teaching that anywhere? And I can guarantee you no one's teaching you about the Federal Reserve Bank and how their influence on your everyday life they're more influential on your everyday life than the President of the United States.
I had all the resources in the world growing up from an educational standpoint, and I've talked to you about this. We don't learn about finances in school. At least I didn't. Like, nobody taught us how to open up a bank account, write a check, balance a checkbook. I don't even know if people still do that today. But no, that's like in schools in general. Taxes. It's not even
Yeah, right.
Yeah, man, I just hired a tax dude today because I didn't know what I was doing.
Right. But he was asking, like, in the Black community, as far as like your family members teaching you about that financial literacy, as opposed to school systems. I went to a white school too. They're not going to.
So I understood that as school systems, but as it pertains to the school system, there's not enough education on financial literacy.
I don't want to put her on the spot, but I like.
And I'm gonna stop here again, but I want to mention this book called "When Money Dies," written by Adam Ferguson. It's basically about the Weimar Republic and what happened to Germany when the central banks got out of control and started printing money like crazy, like our current central bank is doing and other central banks around the world. Check it out. I highly recommend it. Financial literacy is a thing for everyone. And it's not something that is, the Black community in particular being victimized by. No one teaching us financial literacy. No one's teaching anybody financial literacy. Okay.
I'd like to hear from Tasha. She's an educator at a HBCU.
Yes,
I don't know if anybody's more qualified to speak on this thing.
I agree.
It's kind of twofold. So in part, from a professional standpoint, it makes me very sad. We have students who you can tell they know nothing about finance, no financial literacy whatsoever. They barely know how to complete their financial aid requests to get into school. And then once they get there, you think you have to max out your student loans just to take care of yourself. Because if something happens in these 9 months that you're away at school, you can't call home and get any money. So you max out as much as you can borrow because you think you got to have it stored up to take care of yourself. And it's sad. It's heartbreaking because then they leave that, you've written a book on it. Their interest goes up and all that, and then you spend the rest of your professional life trying to pay for the profession. And it's heartbreaking. But on the other side of that, I think about my own personal story. I think sometimes you carry the weight on your shoulders because you're the difference maker. I'm the oldest of 4 children, and my parents did not teach us much about money. I thought, you know, everything I brought home, I had to put on my back or on my feet. I just thought that's how you show that you have money. And once I realized those mistakes, because I was in debt and because I was trying to put myself through college, I had to reach back and teach my siblings.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to stop here real quick. She mentioned something about, you know, how she viewed life as far as, you know, she got some money, she bought, and whatever she did, she bought something and put it on her back and put it on her feet. And I think this is, you know, a lot of people in the Black community and outside of the Black community see the African American community primarily concerned with material wealth and just showing bling or whatnot. And I looked up the definition of success the other day, and there's generally 2 definitions. Now, I'm not going to go into it, but I'll just put it like this. Success can be looked at as one's ability to consume. So you're talking about material goods. Hey, he's successful. He's driving a Mercedes. She's successful. She has a yacht. Or you can look at success as the ability to produce. Hey, this guy's really successful. He's in the garage trying to sell books. He has a dream. He just made $1 profit today. You know, that you're looking at that as success. Well, in America today, in general, we have put much more value in someone's ability to consume than one's ability to produce. And once that person who is currently producing something and making very little profit, once that person starts to make a big profit, they're villain. They become the villain, right? Bezos, right? He wasn't on nobody's radar when he was in the garage selling books, but all of a sudden, you know, he's making money. Now he's the devil. That's an American thing, and you can see the result of that. Our economy is 70% consumption. We're no longer the greatest producer in the world. We're the greatest debtor in the world. And I've always said this, I wouldn't say always, but for past several years, I've said the African American community is the canary in the American coal mine. Where we go, America follows. So when you see, you know, a lot of these socialist type of programs that were ushered into cities where I grew up in, like Detroit or Atlanta, things like that, you see them now being ushered in on a national scale, and you can see the result of that in Detroit. So I'm gonna let him keep going.
Even to the point that as an adult, we have gotten together as 4 children and said, okay, whose credit are we fixing next? Everybody take their money. Let's, you know, how much in debt are you? And we fix it as a family. And once we taught ourselves that, I think that's something that will create generational wealth, because it took one person going off to school, messing up, realizing I can teach my own family this. So if the educational system doesn't teach me, if my parents didn't know to teach me, if the community doesn't teach me, I can teach myself, and then I'm going to teach the people that I love. And that becomes a personal responsibility.
That's right. Amen.
Great.
Great response.
Do you all believe as a race, I'm not talking about you specifically, but do you believe as a race, African Americans, we play the victim?
Hey, man.
All right, so that's a good place to stop, and they stopped it there, so I'm gonna stop it here. If you got something out of this, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. Leave some comments below. Let me know what you think. Sometimes I rant, and you may have confused you instead of like enlightened you in a way. If you need anything clarified, or if you need to know where I got these books or something like that, let me know. I'll definitely reach out to you. But with that said, stay tuned for part 2 of this. I'll leave a description. In the description, I'll leave a link to the full podcast that we're viewing here as well. Until next time, stay safe and remember to celebrate diversity safely.